Welcome to Sleepy Crimes. I am Anna, your host. Tonight, we drift into the shadows of the United States ship Scorpion, 1968. The story begins on a biting, gray morning in February at the edge of the Virginia coastline. Imagine the air in Norfolk on the 15th of February, 1968. It is a damp, bone-chilling cold that clings to the wool of heavy pea coats and whistles through the steel girders of the shipyard. The Atlantic is a restless shade of slate, churning with whitecaps that spray a fine, salty mist onto the faces of the men standing on the pier. Before them sits a dark, low silhouette against the water, the Scorpion. She is a skipjack-class nuclear attack submarine, a sleek and predatory shape of black steel that looks like a great whale resting at the surface. As the lines are cast off, there is a distinct scent in the air, not just the brine of the sea, but the heavy, earthy smell of hydraulic fluid and the sharp tang of diesel. A faint, iridescent shimmer follows in her wake as she pulls away from the pier. A small leak of 1,500 gallons of oil from her conning tower that serves as a quiet, ignored warning of the wear and tear beneath her skin. Inside the hull, the atmosphere is a world of its own. It is a cramped, metallic labyrinth where 99 men move in a choreographed dance of necessity. The air is thick with the hum of the Westinghouse nuclear reactor and the low, constant vibration of machinery that feels like a heartbeat against the soles of their boots. The lighting is soft and artificial, casting long, shifting shadows against the walls of the narrow passageways. Many of the crew have begun to call her the United States ship Scrap Iron. It is a nickname born of a weary affection, but also a quiet concern. There are over 100 uncompleted work orders on the books. Seawater valves are stiff, and the emergency ballast system is temperamental. Yet, as they descend into the deep, leaving the world of sunlight and wind behind, the men settle into their rhythm. They are young, many under the age of 25, with dreams of home tucked into their bunks in the form of worn photographs and unread letters. They are led by Commander Francis Slattery, a man of only 36 years who carries the weight of the vessel and the safety of his 99 souls with a calm, practiced hand. The Scorpion spends the next few months in the Mediterranean Sea, operating as part of the 6th Fleet. The mission is routine, a delicate game of hide and seek in the deep blue waters of the Old World. They slide past the Strait of Gibraltar, the immense rock standing as a silent sentry to their passage. They make port calls in Naples, where the air smells of roasted coffee and ancient stone, and in Rota, Spain, where the sunlight is golden and warm on their skin for the first time in weeks. But most of their time is spent in the silence of the depths, spying on Soviet naval movements. It is the height of the Cold War, and the ocean is a chessboard. They listen to the rhythmic pulse of distant propellers through their sonar headsets, translating the language of the deep into tactical data. They are ghosts in the water, invisible to the world above, moving through a landscape of underwater mountains and silent valleys, where the pressure of the ocean pushes against the steel hull with a force that groans and pops like a living thing. In mid-May, the deployment comes to an end. The order is given to come about and head west, back across the vast expanse of the Atlantic toward Norfolk. There is a shift in the mood on board, a lightness that spreads through the mess decks and the engine room. They are going home. The arrival is scheduled for Memorial Day, the 27th of May, at 1 in the afternoon. On the 17th of May, the Scorpion leaves the Mediterranean behind, passing through the gates of the Atlantic and entering the deep, rolling swells of the open ocean. The water here is different, colder, darker, and thousands of feet deep. On the night of the 20th of May, the submarine attempts to reach the radio station in Rota, Spain, for an unusually long time. The signal is weak, flickering like a candle in a storm. They eventually reach a station in Greece, which forwards their messages. They are closing in on a group of Soviet vessels to begin a final period of surveillance. The Scorpion is running at 15 knots, submerged at a depth of 350 feet, a silent hunter moving through the velvet dark of the sea. The final transmission comes on the morning of May 22nd, 1968. The submarine is approximately 250 miles southwest of the Azores. The message is brief and professional, a routine position report that betrays no hint of the tragedy that is about to unfold. Commander Slattery's report is received by Atlantic Submarine Force Headquarters, confirming their coordinates and their steady progress toward home. It is a quiet moment in the communications center in Norfolk, just another set of numbers on a page. But after that message, the radio waves go silent. There is no further word, no distress call, no frantic tapping of Morse code, just the vast, empty static of the Atlantic. Back in Virginia, the families are already planning the homecoming. Wives are choosing dresses, and children are counting the days until they can see their fathers on the pier. They do not know that as the sun sets on that Wednesday in May, the Scorpion has already entered a silence that will last for decades. The coordinates given in that last message would be the final footprint of 99 men before they were swallowed by the deep, leaving behind only a mystery that would haunt the Navy for generations to come. The morning of May 27, 1968, arrived at the Norfolk Naval Base draped in a heavy, slate-gray blanket of clouds. At Pier 22, the air was thick with the scent of salt spray and the faint, oily tang of diesel fuel that always seemed to cling to the harbor. Families had begun to gather early, their colorful coats a stark contrast against the industrial backdrop of the docks. Children clutched small American flags, the wooden sticks smooth and cool in their hands, while wives adjusted their scarves against a persistent, biting drizzle that blurred the horizon where the sea met the sky. There was a festive hum in the air, a collective exhale of relief as 99 sailors were expected to return from their 3-month Mediterranean deployment. The water of the Elizabeth River lapped rhythmically against the concrete pilings, a gentle, repetitive sound like a slow heartbeat, while the distant calls of gulls echoed through the mist. Everyone watched that specific patch of gray water, waiting for the sleek, dark silhouette of the USS Scorpion to break the surface, trailing white foam and carrying their loved ones home. The wind whipped at the edges of hand-painted banners that read "Welcome Home," making the paper crackle like distant gunfire. As the clock moved toward 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the scheduled hour of arrival, the chatter on the pier began to soften. The rhythmic slap of the tide against the pilings seemed to grow louder in the absence of conversation. Eyes were fixed on the horizon, straining to see the sleek, black dorsal fin of the Skipjack-class submarine cutting through the whitecaps. The water was rough, the waves topped with frothy, aggressive foam, but these were naval families. They knew the ocean was a fickle neighbor. A delay of 10 minutes, then 20, felt like a mere technicality. Perhaps the weather had forced a slower approach, or perhaps the radio was acting up, a common enough occurrence on the vessel some of the crew had jokingly nicknamed scrap iron. People shifted their weight from one foot to the other, the soles of their shoes squeaking softly on the wet pavement. They checked their watches, the gold-rimmed faces catching the dim light, and reassured one another with tight, hopeful smiles. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the festive air began to evaporate, replaced by a crystalline, sharp anxiety that settled into the marrow of those waiting on the docks. The rain began to fall harder now, turning the bright red balloons into heavy, sagging shapes that strained against their strings. While the families shivered in the rain, a very different atmosphere reigned inside the sterile, windowless rooms of the Submarine Force Atlantic headquarters. There, Vice Admiral Arnold Shade moved with a heavy, deliberate pace. He knew what the wives on the pier did not. The Scorpion had been silent for 5 days. The last required position report had been expected on the 22nd of May and had never arrived. Behind the closed doors of the command center, the air was thick with the hum of electronic equipment and the hushed, urgent whispers of men in uniform. They had already been conducting a quiet, high-level inquiry, checking and rechecking the hydrophone arrays that listened to the deep pulse of the Atlantic. The Admiral looked at the large wall maps, where the projected path of the Scorpion was marked in a bold, unwavering line that ended abruptly in the vast, indigo, empty space of the Central Ocean. The radio rooms were hushed, filled only with the rhythmic crackle of static and the low, steady hum of electronic equipment. Technicians adjusted their headsets, pressing the cold plastic against their ears, straining to hear a voice, a signal, or even a ghost of a transmission amidst the vast, empty white noise of the ocean. Every sweeping second hand on the wall clocks felt like a physical weight pressing against the room's collective chest. By 3 o'clock, the silence from the deep had become a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. The festive atmosphere on Pier 22 finally snapped when the formal declaration was issued at 3:15 in the afternoon. Event submiss. It was a technical term, cold and devoid of emotion, but it carried the weight of a death knell. In an instant, the status of the vessel shifted from expected to missing. On the pier, the announcement was not a loud broadcast, but a ripple of movement as officers began to approach the families, their faces set in grim, unreadable masks. The colorful balloons were forgotten, some slipping from cold fingers to be swept away by the wind toward the open sea. The families were ushered away from the water's edge and into the nearby gymnasium, a cavernous space that smelled of floor wax and stale air. They sat on folding metal chairs that felt cold and unyielding, waiting for news that the vast, churning Atlantic refused to surrender. The transition was jarring, moving from the raw, salt-sprayed hope of the docks to the hollow, echoing silence of a waiting room where the only sound was the muffled sob of a young wife and the steady drum of rain on the metal roof. Within the hour, the machinery of the United States Navy was fully engaged in a desperate search and rescue operation. At nearby airfields, the deep, chest-thumping roar of four-engine Lockheed Orion patrol planes drowned out the sound of the falling rain. These massive aircraft taxied into the gray mist, their propellers slicing through the humid air as they climbed toward the clouds. Their mission was to fly out over the churning Atlantic, skimming low over the waves to look for any sign of a hull, a life ring, or an oil slick. Out at sea, destroyers and other submarines were diverted from their courses, their bows cutting through the mountainous waves of the nor'easter as they raced toward the Scorpion's last known coordinates. The ocean they entered was a landscape of infinite shadows, a three-dimensional wilderness where the distance between the surface and the seabed was measured in miles of crushing, sunless pressure. Sonar operators sat in darkened rooms aboard the search ships, their faces illuminated by the eerie, rhythmic glow of green circular screens. They listened through the pings of their equipment, hoping to catch the metallic clank of a hull or the rhythmic pulse of an emergency beacon. But the sea was loud with its own voices, the groaning of shifting tectonic plates and the chaotic churning of the Gulf Stream, leaving the searchers to hunt for a needle in a haystack made of liquid and shadow. As night fell over Norfolk on that Monday, the rain continued to wash over the empty Pier 22. The banners were now just soggy heaps of paper caught in the storm drains, and the red flotation boom, where the Scorpion was meant to tie up, bobbed aimlessly in the dark, churning water. The city went to sleep, but in the gymnasium and in the command centers, the lights stayed on, harsh, fluorescent glows that offered no comfort to the families waiting inside. The 99 men of the Scorpion were now the focus of the largest maritime search in history, yet they remained lost in a silence so profound it felt as though the ocean itself had reached up and pulled them into a secret place. The transition from the warmth of a homecoming to the cold reality of a tragedy was complete, leaving behind only the rhythmic, uncaring sound of the waves against the shore. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away and thousands of feet down, the darkness of the Atlantic held the truth, while on the surface, The search ships moved like ghosts through the mist, their spotlights cutting weak, yellow paths through the unending blackness of the sea. Deep beneath the restless surface of the North Atlantic, far below the reach of the morning sun or the churning storms that batter the coast, lies a world of eternal, crushing silence. But to those who knew exactly where to listen, that silence was a carefully maintained illusion. Stretching across the jagged, mountainous topography of the seabed, thousands of miles of heavy, armored cables snaked through the thick silt and over ancient volcanic ridges. These were the hidden ears of the sound surveillance system, known to the few who held its secrets as SOSUS to the uninitiated. It was referred to only by the mundane cover name of Project Caesar, a title meant to suggest nothing more than routine oceanographic research. In reality, it was a massive, classified net made of hydrophones, cast across the vastness of the ocean to catch the faintest whisper of a Soviet propeller or the distant, metallic hum of a nuclear reactor. It was a web of sound, designed to track the movements of ghosts in the dark. In the final, desperate days of May in 1968, as the banners in Norfolk began to wilt in the rain, the men in the quiet, windowless listening stations began to realize that the net had caught a sound that would change everything. Inside the naval facilities, or NAVFACS, the atmosphere was one of strained, clinical focus. The air was cool and smelled of ozone, dry paper, and the faint, sweet scent of floor wax. Technicians sat in ergonomic chairs, their forms illuminated by the soft, amber glow of vacuum tubes and the rhythmic flickering of oscilloscope screens. They wore heavy headphones that pressed against their ears, blocking out the hum of the air conditioning, so they could immerse themselves in the acoustic heart of the Atlantic. They listened to the low-frequency songs of wandering humpback whales, the tectonic groans of the Earth's crust shifting miles below, and the constant, white noise hiss of the waves above. It was a meditative, almost hypnotic task, until the order came down to look back through the archives. They were told to find a specific window of time, a moment when the Scorpion had fallen silent. The search was not for a voice, but for an ending. The technicians began to pull the large reels of magnetic tape from their canisters, the plastic clicking softly as they were threaded onto the machines. They were looking for the morning of May 22nd, 1968. The search focused on recordings from stations as far apart as Newfoundland and the Canary Islands. The analysts moved with slow, deliberate precision, rewinding the tapes and watching the needles on the drum recorders. They were searching for an anomaly, a spike in the data that didn't belong to the natural rhythms of the sea. At precisely 1842 Greenwich Mean Time, they found it. On the paper readouts, the steady, vibrating lines suddenly leapt into a jagged peak, a violent scratch of ink that signaled a massive release of energy. It was a sound that had traveled through the deep sound channel, a layer of water where temperature and pressure allow acoustic waves to journey for thousands of miles without losing their clarity. As they played the audio back, the sound was not a single, sharp crack like a gunshot. Instead, it was a sequence of low, rumbling thuds that echoed through the headphones like a heavy train wreck occurring in a deep, stone tunnel. It was the sound of something immense and hollow being folded by a force beyond human comprehension. Over the span of just 190 seconds, the hydrophones recorded 15 distinct acoustic events. Each one was a separate blow, a catastrophic structural failure as the ocean claimed the vessel piece by piece. The first sound was the most haunting, a singular, powerful boom that some experts believe was an internal explosion, perhaps a battery or a torpedo. But what followed was the true sound of the void. As the Scorpion began its long, vertical slide into the abyss, it passed through its crushed depth, roughly 1,500 feet below the waves. At that depth, the pressure of the water is so immense that any failure in the hull is instantaneous. The air inside the submarine would have been compressed so violently, and so quickly that it would have reached the temperature of the sun for a fraction of a second. An incandescent flash in the dark before the sea rushed in to fill the vacuum. The recording captured the rhythmic bubble pulses of this collapse, a series of diminishing echoes as the hull buckled and shattered, sending shockwaves through the water that were picked up by sensors hundreds of miles away. Acoustics expert John Craven and his team began the painstaking process of triangulation. They took the time-stamped data from the different stations, calculating the exact millisecond the sound had reached each hydrophone. By comparing the arrival times, they could draw lines across the map of the Atlantic, crossing them until they formed a small, tragic box on the chart. The math led them to a point roughly 400 miles south-southwest of the Azores, a place where the ocean floor drops away to a depth of more than 10,000 feet. The calculations were cold and certain. The sounds had lasted for just over 3 minutes before the ocean returned to its natural, indifferent silence. There were no more propeller turns, no more rhythmic machinery, no more human whispers. There was only the sound of the silt settling on the seabed as the wreckage finally came to rest in the dark. The analysts sat back in their chairs, the headphones finally coming off, leaving them in the sudden, heavy quiet of the room. They knew now where the Scorpion was, even if the rest of the world was still looking at the empty horizon. The coordinates were marked with a small, pencil-drawn X on a classified map, a tiny dot in a vast, blue emptiness. This was the sound of the void, the acoustic ghost of 99 men and their ship, captured on a strip of magnetic tape and stored in a metal cabinet. The search on the surface would continue for weeks, with planes flying low over the whitecaps and destroyers cutting through the swells. But the true answer was already held in the hands of the mathematicians and the sonar technicians. They had heard the death rattle of the Scorpion, a sequence of 15 booms that told a story of pressure, heat, and finality. As the sun set over the Atlantic listening stations, the technicians looked out at the water, seeing it no longer as a surface, but as a deep, dark grave that held its secrets in the form of echoes. The ship was not missing. It was simply where the sound had ended, resting in the crushing weight of the deep, waiting for the eyes of the world to catch up to the ears of the abyss. The Atlantic was not kind to those who sought her secrets in the late months of 1968. On the surface, the research vessel Mizar moved with a slow, agonizing deliberation, its gray hull rising and falling against the rhythmic swell of the deep. There is a specific kind of silence found on a ship in the middle of a vast, empty sea. A silence composed of the low, steady thrum of diesel engines and the hiss of salt spray against cold metal. For weeks, the crew of the Mizar had been ghosts upon the water. Their world narrowed to the confines of a 12-square-mile box located 400 miles southwest of the Azores. The air was thick with the scent of brine and diesel, a heavy, damp atmosphere that clung to the skin like a second layer of clothing. Above them, the sky was a bruised palette of charcoal and lead, while beneath them lay an expanse of water so deep and so dark that it seemed to swallow the very concept of light. They were searching for a needle in a desert of blue, guided only by the invisible echoes of a tragedy that had occurred months before. Connected to the Mizar by a shimmering, 3-mile-long cable was a machine they called the sled. It was a skeletal frame of steel, equipped with the eyes of the surface world. Strobe lights that cut through the darkness in sudden, blinding flashes, and cameras that captured the stillness of the abyss. As the sled drifted through the water column, it moved into a realm where time itself seemed to slow to a crawl. The light from the sun vanished within the first 1,000 feet, replaced by a deep, velvety blackness that pressed against the metal of the cameras with a weight beyond comprehension. Down they went, through the twilight zone and into the midnight zone, until the depth reached 10,000 feet. At this level, the ocean is a graveyard of absolute stillness. There are no currents here to sway the sediment, no sounds to break the ancient quiet. The only thing moving was the sled, a tiny, man-made intruder casting flickering shadows against the Globigerina ooze of the seafloor. A fine, pale mud made of the shells of trillions of microscopic creatures that had fallen through the water over millions of years. Back on the Mizar, the air in the monitor room was stale and warm, smelling of ozone and coffee that had long since gone cold. The scientists and sailors sat in a dim, flickering glow, their eyes strained as they watched the grainy, black-and-white feed from the abyss. The search was not a matter of luck, but a grueling exercise in probability and math. Dr. John Craven had applied the complex logic of Bayesian search theory to the problem, turning the chaos of a sinking submarine into a series of calculated guesses. They looked for ripples in the silt, for the hard, unnatural geometry of man-made steel in a world of soft, organic curves. Every shadow was scrutinized. Every dark shape was a potential clue. For months, they found nothing but the empty, rolling plains of the seabed, a desolate landscape that seemed to mock their efforts. The monotony was a physical weight, an exhaustion that settled into the bones of every man on board. They were chasing a ghost through a liquid darkness, waiting for a single frame of film that would change everything. The breakthrough came in the dying days of October 1968. It was a moment of sudden, jarring clarity that pierced through the fog of fatigue. On the 28th of that month, as the sled moved slowly over the pale floor of the Atlantic, a new shape emerged from the gloom. It did not look like a rock or a natural formation. It was a jagged edge, a curved piece of metal that reflected the strobe light with a dull, haunting sheen. The room on the Mizar went silent, the only sound the soft click and whir of the recording equipment. As the camera drifted further, more debris began to appear, scattered fragments of a life once lived at the surface. They saw the glint of a running light, a sextant, and the mangled remains of internal structures. And then, looming out of the blackness like a fallen titan, they saw the hull. It was not a whole ship, but a series of broken pieces, resting in the eternal dark 2 miles below the waves. The search was over, but the mystery of the Scorpion was only beginning to reveal its physical form. The wreckage lay in 3 distinct, gargantuan pieces, separated by the violence of its final moments. The bow section was the most recognizable, a great, dark cylinder of steel that had slammed into the seabed with such force that it had dug a massive trench into the soft ooze. It sat there, tilted and lonely, its torpedo tubes partially open like gasping mouths. Further away lay the sail, the dorsal fin-shaped tower that had once cut through the surface of the sea. It had been torn completely from the hull, tossed aside by the force of the implosion as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper. The third piece was the stern, a telescoped mass of machinery, where the engine room had been driven forward into the auxiliary spaces by the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the water. The metal had folded and crushed under a weight of thousands of pounds per square inch, turning a marvel of modern engineering into a shattered monument of twisted iron. The 99 souls who had called this vessel home were now part of the silence, resting in a place where the sun never shines. There is a profound, heavy peace at 10,000 feet. The sediment that had been kicked up by the impact of the Scorpion had long since settled, coating the wreckage in a thin, ghostly layer of dust. The nuclear reactor, the heart of the ship, remained encased in its heavy lead shield, a silent and cold power source at the bottom of the world. Nearby, the 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes lay in the silt, their lethal potential neutralized by the crushing embrace of the Atlantic. The water at this depth is near freezing, a constant, unchanging cold that preserves the wreckage in a state of suspended animation. As the strobe lights of the Mizar's sled eventually pulled away, the darkness rushed back in, reclaiming the sight. The 3 pieces of the Scorpion became shadows once more, lost to the sight of man, but forever marked on the maps of the mind. The ocean had claimed its prize, and in the deep, crushing pressure of the abyss, the secrets of what happened in those final seconds remained locked away, guarded by 2 miles of water and a silence that will never be broken. The world above the waves remained restless, far removed from the cold, crushing silence where the Scorpion now rested. In a windowless room in 1968, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, the bitter aroma of burnt beans lingering in the back of the throat, and the faint, ozone tang of electronic equipment that hummed with a low, constant vibration. High-ranking officers sat around long, polished mahogany tables that reflected the harsh, fluorescent lights from above, their uniforms crisp and stiff, their faces etched with a fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. This was the formal Navy Court of Inquiry, a gathering of minds tasked with the impossible, to reconstruct a tragedy from the echoes of the deep. The walls were lined with charts of the Atlantic, vast expanses of blue ink marked with the frantic, jagged lines of search patterns drawn in red grease pencil. The silence in the room was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating weight, a reflection of the 99 souls who had vanished into the pressure. Every rustle of paper, the dry rasp of parchment sliding over wood, every click of a pen against a heavy glass ashtray, felt amplified, as if the very air was waiting for an answer that refused to come. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices echoing off the wood paneling, discussing depths and pressures and structural integrity, as if these clinical terms could somehow soften the blow of a nuclear-powered ghost ship that had simply ceased to be. The key to the mystery lay not in the visible world, but in the invisible realm of sound. Scientists and acoustic analysts gathered around large, reel-to-reel tape recorders, the brown magnetic tape spinning with a soft, hypnotic whir that seemed to pulse in time with the heartbeat of the listeners. These recordings came from the Sound Surveillance System, a secret network of hydrophones anchored to the ocean floor, designed to listen for Soviet intruders. On that fateful day in May, these underwater ears had caught something else. The analysts watched the oscillating needles of their meters, thin silver hands dancing across numbered scales, their eyes following the ink pens as they scratched frantic, vertical lines onto long rolls of yellowing graph paper. It was a visual representation of a death rattle, a jagged mountain range of sound. There was a single, low-order event, a dull thud that vibrated through the water column, followed by a series of 15 distinct, rhythmic pulses. They played the tape over and over, the sound emerging from the speakers as a haunting, metallic groan, like a great beast sighing for the last time. They analyzed the acoustic fingerprint, measuring the microseconds between each pulse, trying to determine if they were hearing the internal collapse of compartments or the external detonation of a weapon. The room was dim, lit only by the glowing green screens of the oscilloscopes, the cathode ray tubes casting long, wavering emerald shadows across the faces of men who were beginning to realize that the ocean never gives up its secrets without a long and agonizing fight. One theory began to emerge from the shadows, whispered by men like John Craven, the Navy's brilliant chief scientist. It centered on the Mark 37 torpedo, a sleek, deadly predator housed in the submarine's forward tubes. They imagined a hot run, a terrifying scenario where a torpedo's engine accidentally ignites while it is still trapped inside the hull. The heat would have been instantaneous and blinding, the silver zinc batteries inside the weapon beginning to cook, their casings blistering and melting like wax. In this version of the story, the crew of the Scorpion would have felt the vibration, heard the frantic, high-pitched whine of the torpedo's propeller spinning against the metal of the tube door. To save the ship, the commander would have ordered a sharp, 180-degree turn, a standard maneuver designed to trigger a safety failsafe that would disarm the weapon. The analysts looked at the acoustic data and saw what they believed to be evidence of a course reversal, a sudden shift in the direction of the sound just before the end. They pictured the men in the control room, their hands flying over valves and levers, the deck tilting as the submarine groaned through its turn, a desperate race against a clock that was already ticking towards zero. They could almost feel the vibration of the hull as the ship fought to save itself from its own armament. But there was another voice in the room, one that spoke of a different kind of failure, not a weapon, but the very lifeblood of the ship. The Scorpion carried a massive main battery, a 69-ton behemoth of lead and acid and silver, nestled deep within the operations compartment. Some argued that a leak in the trash disposal unit had allowed a trickle of salt water to find its way into the battery well. The chemical reaction would have been slow but relentless, producing a faint, acrid smell that would have gone unnoticed amidst the usual scents of oil and sweat. It was a silent buildup of explosive hydrogen gas filling the cramped, airless spaces beneath the deck plates. They described the scene with clinical precision. A single spark, perhaps a tiny blue arc from a light switch or a minuscule short in a frayed wire, would have been enough to ignite the pockets of gas. The resulting explosion would not have been a single, clean blast, but a series of violent eruptions that would have incapacitated the crew in an instant. The air would have turned into a wall of fire and pressure, a thermal wave that moved faster than the blink of an eye, turning the very atmosphere within the hull into an incandescent furnace. The structural analysis groups pored over grainy photographs of the wreckage, noting how the engine room had telescoped into the auxiliary machinery space, a sign of a catastrophic internal failure that had stripped the ship of its ability to fight the crushing weight of the sea. The debate between the torpedo and the battery raged in the quiet corridors of the Pentagon for months, a clash of theories that could never be fully reconciled. The formal court of inquiry eventually released its findings, choosing words that were as cold and empty as the abyss itself. They stated that the certain cause of the loss could not be ascertained from the evidence. It was a professional admission of defeat, a surrender to the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. Yet, the disagreement remained, a fractured legacy left to the families of the 99 men who were never coming home. Some believed the Navy was hiding a darker truth, perhaps a secret skirmish with a Soviet foe in the darkness of the deep, while others saw only the tragic inevitability of a mechanical failure in a ship that had been pushed too hard and maintained too little. As the 1960s drew to a close, the files were tucked away into gray metal cabinets, and the tapes were placed into storage, their magnetic whispers fading over the years. But in the minds of those who listened to those recordings, the sound of the Scorpion's end remained vivid, a haunting reminder that beneath the waves, the line between a triumph of engineering and a tomb of steel is as thin as a single, silver-zinc diaphragm. The mystery had not been solved. It had merely been filed away, waiting for the ocean to whisper the truth once more. Deep beneath the rolling, slate-gray surface of the North Atlantic, where the sunlight has not touched the sand for millions of years, there is a silence so profound it feels like a physical weight. The water here is not merely cold. It is a crushing, ancient presence, pressing down with the force of thousands of tons upon every square inch of the seafloor. It is a world of ink-black shadows and absolute stillness, interrupted only by the ghostly, slow-motion drift of marine snow, tiny particles of organic matter that fall like shimmering feathers through the darkness. In this lightless void, 400 miles southwest of the Azores, the wreckage of the Scorpion has found its final resting place. The hull, once a proud and sleek silhouette of mid-century engineering, now lies in fragments across a landscape of gray silt and jagged volcanic rock. The sail, that iconic tower that once stood tall above the waves as the ship cruised through the Mediterranean, lies detached and tilted in the mud, resembling a forgotten monument to a journey that never truly ended. There is a haunting beauty in this isolation. The currents move with a slow, rhythmic hum, a low-frequency pulse that vibrates through the metallic remains of the ship, creating a sound like a distant, mournful bell. Here, in the crushing depths of over 10,000 feet, the passage of time seems to have slowed to a crawl. The rust and the silt have begun to claim the steel, softening the edges of the jagged tiers in the pressure hull. And yet, the memory of those who served within remains as sharp and enduring as the cold that surrounds them. The 99 men who were lost in May of 1968 are often described as being on an eternal patrol. It is a poetic term used by the Navy to honor those who never returned to port, suggesting that their watch continues even in the silence of the deep. If you were to descend through the freezing layers of the ocean, past the twilight zone, where the last traces of blue fade into black, you would find a scene of devastating stillness. The bow section of the ship remains largely intact, its torpedo tubes staring into the dark like hollow, sightless eyes. Inside those tubes, the weapons that were once the subject of so much debate and theory remain nestled in their cradles, submerged in the same water that claimed the lives of their handlers. The stern of the vessel, however, tells a different story, one of violent, sudden forces. It is telescoped and crumpled, a testament to the unimaginable pressure that seized the ship as it plunged past its crushed depth. Yet, despite the violence of its end, the site is now treated with the utmost reverence. It is a designated war grave, a sacred space where the 99 souls are left undisturbed. The Navy occasionally sends remote vehicles to glide through the darkness, their bright spotlights cutting through the gloom to inspect the hull and monitor the environment. These machines move like silent observers, documenting the slow decay of the steel and ensuring that the nuclear heart of the ship remains encased in its leaden tomb. There is no salvage here, no attempt to bring the ship home. The ocean has claimed the Scorpion, and the Navy has accepted that some mysteries are meant to remain at the bottom of the sea. The legacy of the Scorpion is not found solely in the wreckage on the seafloor, but in the very fabric of modern submarine life. From the tragedy of 1968 emerged a renewed and ironclad commitment to safety known as the SUBSAFE program. Though the program had been initiated years earlier after the loss of the Thresher, the disappearance of the Scorpion served as a grim and undeniable reminder that safety is a fragile thing, bought with the highest price imaginable. In the years following the disaster, the standards for every weld, every valve, and every pipe on a nuclear submarine were elevated to a level of scrutiny that knows no mercy for human error. This program is a living memorial, a promise written in the ink of 99 names. It ensures that every sailor who steps into the steel belly of a submarine today is protected by a shield of rigorous quality control and redundant systems. Because of the hard lessons learned from the Scorpion, no American submarine has been lost to mechanical failure in the decades since. The safety of the modern fleet is a direct descendant of the sorrow felt in the corridors of the Pentagon and in the quiet homes of Norfolk when the ship failed to arrive on that fateful Memorial Day. The tragedy transformed the Navy into a culture of absolute accountability, where the ghosts of the past stand as sentinels over the crews of the present. Every time a submarine surfaces safely after a long deployment, there is a silent echo of the Scorpion's final voyage, a reminder that their loss was not in vain, but was the catalyst for a safer future in the silent service. As we reflect on the final moments of the Scorpion, the theories and the technical debates begin to fade, replaced by a sense of quiet peace. Whether it was a rogue torpedo, a faulty battery, or a sudden mechanical failure, the result remains the same. A quiet corner of the Atlantic has become a sanctuary of memory. Imagine the names etched into the bronze plaques at the various memorials across the country, from the wind-swept banks of the Missouri River to the bustling naval stations in Virginia. Each name represents a life, a family, and a story that was cut short in the prime of youth. There is the commander, 36-year-old Francis Slattery, who led his crew with a steady hand through the complexities of the Cold War. There are the young enlisted men, some only 19 or 20 years old, who dreamed of the world beyond the horizon. In the silence of the night, their families still hold onto the flickering light of remembrance, and the Navy continues to honor their patrol. The mystery of what truly happened during those final minutes may never be fully solved, and perhaps it is better that way. The Atlantic is a vast and secretive keeper of stories, and it holds the Scorpion close in its cold embrace. The ship has become a part of the ocean itself, a reef of steel and memory where the currents whisper through the hull and the shadows dance in the eternal dark. There is no more fear, no more pressure, and no more conflict. There is only the long, rhythmic breathing of the sea, and the knowledge that the 99 are finally at rest. Now let the image of the deep ocean fill your mind. See the way the blue light slowly turns to gray, then to a soft, velvet black. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, replaced by the cool, calming presence of the water. The mystery of the Scorpion is a story of courage and of tragedy, but it is also a story of a peace that surpasses understanding. As the currents of the Atlantic drift over the wreckage, they carry with them the echoes of 1,000 journeys. The ship is safe now. The crew is at peace. The long watch is over, and the lights of the harbor are no longer needed. The ocean is a vast, soft blanket, tucking the memory of the ship into the folds of history. Let your own thoughts drift like that marine snow, falling slowly and gently toward a place of absolute quiet. There is no need for answers tonight. There is only the comfort of the darkness and the steady, slow rhythm of your own heart. The case rests now. Let the details fade. You are safe. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and have a good night. Sleep well.